Welcome to Voice of Stories. Discover tales that inspire, captivate, and bring words to life. Subscribe for unforgettable stories.
Welcome, friends, to a heartwarming tale of a young boy's deep love for trains, family, and the miracles that can happen when we believe. Enjoy the story. The shiny SUV rolled smoothly through downtown Boston's busy streets. 8-year-old Nathan Parker pressed his nose to the window, watching the bustling city life around him. His mother, Melissa, glanced at him in the rearview mirror and smiled. Like most mornings, they were heading to his private school in Back Bay, where the tuition cost about the same as a small car. "Mom, look! Another train!" Nathan exclaimed, pointing excitedly at the commuter rail tracks that ran alongside their route. Although no train was passing, he was thrilled every time he saw them. He had never actually ridden one, as the Parkers always drove wherever they needed to go. "You really love those trains, don't you, sweetheart?" Melissa asked, adjusting her sunglasses. "Why don't we take the subway downtown today?" she suggested. "I think it's time you learned how it works." Nathan's face lit up like a Christmas tree. "Really? You mean it? Can we ride the red line? Billy from my class says that's the best one." "We'll ride whatever line you want, honey," Melissa replied with a laugh, already planning the adventure in her mind. She'd need to dig out her old Charlie card from the bottom of her purse. It had been years since she last used public transportation. Saturday arrived with perfect summer weather, the kind that made Boston feel magical. Melissa dressed casually in jeans and a light sweater, while Nathan bounced around the house with excitement. "Now remember," she said as they approached the station, "we need to be careful. Stay close to me at all times." The next hour was an adventure in urban navigation. Melissa showed Nathan how to buy tickets, navigate the turnstiles, and stand safely on the platform. Nathan's eyes grew wider with every new discovery. "The yellow line means stay back?" he asked, pointing to the edge of the platform. "That's right, safety first," Melissa said. When the train finally arrived, whooshing into the station with a blast of artificial wind, Nathan grabbed his mother's hand tightly. The doors opened with a pneumatic hiss, and they stepped inside together. "This is amazing," Nathan declared, standing by the window as the tunnel walls rushed past. "When I grow up, I'm going to be a train conductor. I'll drive trains all day long." Later that evening, as she shared the day's adventure with her husband Jack, he pulled her close. "See, I told you he'd love it," he said, kissing her temple. "Sometimes we need to let go a little and let him experience the world." Neither of them could have known how prophetic those words would become or how their carefully constructed world was about to shatter. But for that moment, watching Nathan proudly show off his new subway knowledge to his stuffed animals, everything was perfect in the Parker household. The last light of day faded, and in the distance, a train whistle blew. On the evening of July 3rd, excitement filled the air as Boston buzzed with pre-holiday energy. Jack stood in the doorway of Nathan's bedroom, watching him arrange his toy trains in perfect formation for tomorrow's 4th of July celebration. "Dad, will we be able to see the fireworks from our backyard?" Nathan asked, holding a miniature caboose in his hands. "Better than that, buddy," Jack replied. "We're having the whole family over. Remember? Your mom's famous potato salad and burgers on the grill." Jack glanced at his watch. "Speaking of which, I need to run to the store. We're short on supplies." Melissa appeared in the hallway, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. "Don't forget the pickles and maybe grab some more paper plates. Your mother called. She's bringing her famous clad caca, and you know how Howard loves to pile his plate high." "I got it, hon," Jack said, planting a kiss on her cheek. The familiar scent of her lavender perfume lingered as he stepped out. At the supermarket, Jack pulled into a space near the back of the lot. He made a mental checklist of everything he needed: pickles, paper plates, charcoal, extra buns, and reminded himself of how much work it took to host a family gathering. He'd missed last year's celebration due to a business trip, and this time, he was determined to make it perfect. He texted Melissa, then set off to grab the items. 20 minutes later, he emerged from the store with 2 loaded bags. The security cameras captured him walking back toward his car, setting down the groceries, then opening his trunk. That's when a shadow moved behind him. The rest of what happened was captured in a police report. Abandoned groceries scattered across the asphalt, a broken bottle of pickle juice mixing with darker stains, and a trunk left open like a gaping mouth. Glanced at the clock again. It was 8:45 p.m. She called Jack several times, but each attempt went straight to voicemail. Maybe he's stuck in line, she told Nathan, who was still playing with his trains. You know how crazy stores get before holidays. By 9:30 p.m., she called the police. By midnight, they found Jack's car. The bags were spilled across the pavement, and blood spatter analysis suggested a blunt force injury to the head. The police dogs followed a scent to the edge of the parking lot where it disappeared near tire marks, suggesting a second vehicle had been involved. Mrs. Parker, the detective said gently, taking notes. Can you think of anyone who might want to harm your husband? Any recent threats or disputes at work? Melissa shook her head, clutching Nathan's small hand. He stood quietly beside her, staring at his father's abandoned car, the yellow police tape fluttering in the warm summer breeze. In the distance, fireworks started going off, their celebratory booms a cruel contrast to the nightmare unfolding in the parking lot. Jack doesn't have enemies, she whispered. Everyone loves Jack. The detective nodded, but his eyes betrayed a different thought. After 15 years on the force, he knew that sometimes the people we think we know best can hide the darkest secrets. But looking at the devastated woman and her son, he kept those thoughts to himself. In August, the oppressive heat of Boston matched the weight pressing down on Melissa's shoulders. She stared at her bank statement, 2 months of mortgage payments missed, credit cards maxed out on private investigators who had found nothing. Jack's salary had been their primary income, and her part-time work at a medical lab barely covered groceries. Mom, Nathan asked, standing in the doorway of her home office, clutching his favorite train engine. Are we really moving? Melissa closed her laptop and forced a smile. Come here, sweetie, she patted her lap. He climbed up, though he was getting a little too big for this. Remember Grandpa Tom and Grandma Susan's farm in Vermont? The one with all the animals and the big tractor? That's right. We're going to live there for a while. Won't that be an adventure? Before Nathan could respond, the doorbell rang. Melissa's heart sank. She knew who it would be. Jack's parents, Howard and Gloria. Their faces were filled with concern as they stood on the porch. Polly, dear, you can't be serious about this moving idea, Gloria said, bursting through the door without waiting for an invitation. You and Nathan belong here, with family. Howard, ever the practical one, placed a steadying hand on Gloria's shoulder. What Gloria means is, we have plenty of room. The guest suite is yours for as long as you need it. I've made up my mind, Melissa replied quietly, leading them to the kitchen. Nathan had disappeared upstairs, sensing the tension. Mom and Dad need help on the farm anyway, she continued. Dad's hip isn't what it used to be. But what about the investigation? Gloria's voice cracked. What if Jack comes home and we're not here? The question hung in the air like summer lightning, dangerous and electric. Melissa gripped the counter, her knuckles white. The police have my parents' number, and my cell number hasn't changed. She paused, then whispered, Howard, I hate to ask, but could you help us move? I can't afford movers and we'll need the truck. Without a word, Howard pulled out his keys. Let's get started now. Gloria will help Nathan pack his room. The next few hours flew by as they packed up the house. 9 years of memories condensed into boxes labeled kitchen, fragile, Nathan's toys, and winter clothes. Each box felt like sealing away a piece of their former life, the one where Jack would come home every night and they'd plan vacations, school events, and birthday parties. Gloria found Melissa in the master bedroom, staring at Jack's closet. His suits hung there like empty promises. His favorite red tie was still draped over the rack, just where he'd left it that July evening. Leave them, Gloria whispered. Leave his things here. For when? Melissa nodded, Some things were just too painful to pack away. By sunset, Howard's SUV was loaded with boxes, and Nathan sat in the back seat, his train set safely beside him. As they drove away from the house, Melissa watched Gloria grow smaller in the side mirror, still standing on the porch, still waving goodbye. "You can always come back," Howard said softly, merging onto the highway. Nathan nervously followed his mom, Melissa, down the worn hallway of the school. "Your class has 12 students, Nathan. I'm sure you'll make friends in no time," she reassured him. Nathan gripped the straps of his backpack tighter, feeling uneasy. The scratched lockers and hand-drawn artwork on the walls felt foreign compared to the polished hallways of his old school. At least his favorite train keychain, a small gift from his old life, hung from his backpack. A tiny bit of comfort. The principal opened a door labeled 3rd grade. "Here we are," he announced. A dozen pairs of eyes turned to Nathan, making him feel even more out of place. He instinctively moved closer to his mom. "This is Nathan Parker from Boston," Mrs. Wheeler, his teacher, said kindly. "Let's make him feel welcome." A chorus of, "Hi, Nathan," filled the room, but one voice was silent, a stocky boy in the back row with a crew cut. He eyed Nathan's clothes and his branded backpack with disdain. "You can sit next to Billy," Mrs. Wheeler said, pointing to an empty desk. As Nathan walked to the seat, the boy stuck out his foot. Nathan tripped, but managed to catch himself. "Oops," the boy sneered. "Sorry about that." "Bobby," Mrs. Wheeler warned, but Nathan could tell this wouldn't be the last time Bobby made things difficult. Throughout the morning, Bobby found little ways to annoy Nathan, a jab of his elbow in the hallway, a tug on his backpack strap, small things that were hard to prove. At recess, Nathan heard Bobby whisper to another boy, "Look at his fancy clothes. Bet he thinks he's better than us country kids." Nathan wanted to explain that his family wasn't rich anymore, that they were living on a dairy farm now. But instead, he sat alone on the swing, watching other kids play tag. That evening, Melissa noticed how quiet Nathan was. "Everything okay at school, sweetie?" she asked. Nathan pushed his meatloaf around on his plate. "It's fine," he replied, though it wasn't. He couldn't tell her about Bobby. She had enough on her plate. Her long shifts at the dairy farm left her exhausted, and he saw her stumbling home at dawn, the smell of hay and milk in the air. "Mrs. Wheeler says you're doing well in class," Melissa added. "Yeah, Mom, just different from Boston," Nathan muttered. Later, in his room, Nathan lined up his toy trains on the windowsill. Outside, the monastery's domes caught the last rays of the sunset, and the bells began to toll, their deep sound echoing across the valley. "I wish you were here, Dad," Nathan whispered to the gathering darkness. The wind rustled outside and Nathan's voice carried over the hills. "Dad! Dad!" His calls seemed to echo back at him, mocking his hope. Melissa froze halfway up the path to the house. She had come home early from the dairy farm, her arms sore from milking, to find Nathan's backpack left on the porch swing. His ritual was clear. Every day after school, he climbed the hill and called for his dad. Melissa watched from behind a wild rose bush as Nathan stood at the hill's edge, silhouetted against the gray sky. His school uniform fluttered in the wind as he cupped his hands around his mouth, crying out, "Dad, where are you?" Each cry felt like a knife to Melissa's heart. It had been 3 months since Jack had disappeared, and this was how Nathan coped, standing on the hill calling out to the wind. Nathan's voice cracked on the last word. He wiped his eyes with his sleeve, smearing dirt across his cheek. Melissa suspected it was another tear from Bobby's bullying. The monastery bells began to toll, their deep tones rolling across the valley. Nathan dropped his hands and stared at the golden domes in the distance. Something about those bells always seemed to calm him. "They sound like Dad's laugh, don't they?" Melissa turned in surprise to see her father, Tom, standing beside her. His weathered face was full of concern. "How long has he been doing this?" Tom asked. "Since the second week we arrived," Melissa whispered, her voice breaking. "Every day after school, unless I'm home. Then he asks if he can go look at the view. Tom gently placed his hand on her shoulder. The boy needs to grieve in his own way, just like you do. As Nathan made his way down the hill, head bowed against the wind, Melissa knew he would compose himself before reaching the house. He would smile and pretend everything was fine. It was what they both did. They carried on, even when their hearts were breaking. The next day, Nathan's face lit up when he saw the permission slip for the monastery field trip on the kitchen table. It was the first time he'd smiled in days, and even Mrs. Wheeler noticed his improved mood. On the morning of the trip, the sky was clear and crisp. Nathan wore his new sweater, a gift from his grandparents. The yellow school bus dropped them off at the train station, where they would catch the 9:15 to the monastery. Nathan could barely contain his excitement. It was his first real train ride. Before he could fully enjoy the moment, a strange woman appeared from the last car. She wore dark, flowing skirts, jingling bracelets, and carried a worn leather bag filled with mysterious objects. Her eyes, lined with coal, scanned the platform before settling on Bobby's mother. "Watch your boy carefully today," she said, her voice heavy with an accent Nathan didn't recognize. "The path he walks is dangerous." Bobby's mother snapped at her. "Mind your own business, you old fraud." The fortune teller shrugged and moved down the aisle, her bag full of glass bottles clicking with each step. Bobby, emboldened by his mother's dismissal, snatched an old book from the woman's hands as she passed. "Look at this weird writing," he sneered. "Give it back," Nathan whispered, but Bobby ignored him, thumbing through the yellowed pages. "Bet this is worth something." The woman's voice was urgent as she cried, "My book! Return it, child." Without thinking, Nathan rushed forward, grabbed the book from Bobby's hands, and ran it back to the woman. "I'm sorry about my classmate," he said as he handed it back to her. Her eyes softened as she took the book from him. She caught his hand gently. "You have a kind heart, child," she said, her voice low. "When you reach the monastery, watch the faces carefully. Really look at them. Promise me." "I promise," Nathan stammered, both confused and intrigued. As the train pulled away, Nathan's mind replayed her words. What had she meant? Later, when they arrived at St. Michael's Monastery, Nathan's heart raced. The golden domes loomed ahead, and he pressed his face against the window, feeling an excitement he couldn't explain. Something waited for him there. The monks' dining hall was filled with whispers from his classmates as they tried to stay quiet. The sunlight poured through the windows, casting golden rectangles on the worn wooden tables where monks had eaten for centuries. Nathan sat quietly, the fortune teller's words echoing in his mind. Watch the faces carefully. As he studied the monks, he saw one who caught his attention, a young novice with familiar blue eyes. His heart stopped. "Dad?" Nathan whispered the word, and the novice's face changed. He seemed startled, then confused, then hopeful. Nathan ran to him, wrapping his arms around the novice's waist. "It's me, Nathan," he cried. The room fell silent. Mrs. Wheeler stepped forward, concerned, but stopped when she saw the novice's face transform. "Nathan," he said, voice trembling. "My son." His hands shook as he touched Nathan's hair. I remember. Oh God, I remember." The head monk approached, and others gathered around. "Brother Gabriel, or should I say Jack," he said. "He came to us in May. A fisherman found him unconscious by the river. He had no memory of his past." Nathan clung to his father, tears soaking the novice's robe. "Mom's here too." "Well, not here, but we live in Vermont with Grandma and Grandpa now. We never stopped looking for you." Jack, or Brother Gabriel as they called him now, sank to his knees, his eyes full of emotion. "I didn't know who I was, but every evening when the bells rang, I felt something pulling me. Now I know. I was hearing the same bells you and Nathan heard across the valley." Later, after police statements and tears had been wiped away, the family sat together in the monastery garden. Jack, still in his novice robes, held Melissa's hand tightly, as if never wanting to let go. "I didn't know who I was," Jack said softly. "But now I know. I was hearing the bells calling me home." Nathan leaned against his father, feeling a warmth he had missed for so long. "Can we go home now?" he asked. "Home," Jack repeated, tasting the word. He looked at Melissa, then at Nathan. "All of us together." Above them, the monastery bells began to toll, no longer calling across an empty valley but celebrating a family made whole. Somewhere, far away, the fortune teller smiled, tucked her ancient book back into her bag, and boarded a train heading south, knowing that some things, like hope, are worth waiting for.